2, 3. Hey, I'm here with Keith Morrison, the CEO of North American Nickel. Very interesting because, as I was telling Keith a second ago, we haven't had a chance to talk to somebody in the resource industry. For our clients in Vancouver, who, big mining city, our clients in Perth, much the same. This sort of connects the two different sides of the world for us because I think there's folks listening to this on both sides of the world that will find this interesting. And Keith, and you were telling me real briefly your background. How did you get into what is for you now, I guess, the nickel extraction industry?
Yeah, I tend to be focused earlier stage. Like I'm in the nickel exploration and development.
Okay.
So typically we would exit projects by the time they're into major scales of mining. But I came at it from a technology point of view. I developed technology businesses in exploration, subsurface imaging, globalized those, developed deep relationships with leading resource companies and different governments around the world, and then transitioned to senior management and board positions as I became more experienced, and then essentially started working with private equity groups as a fix-it guy. You go into different resource investments for them and try and upgrade management technical capacity or board governance capabilities and just improve kind of business performance.
So let me back that up for a lot of folks. Subsurface imaging, subsurface. How do you get into that? What does that entail? What does that mean? So, like for example, some of folks listening to this right now are like our doctor clients, and they're thinking, okay, well, how does that apply to business? Can you explain how that applies to the resource exploration business?
The example you gave is quite good, but medical imaging, it's very similar technologies at different scale. But a simple example would be that people would be comfortable with are fish finders.
Okay.
Radar looking, underground water by sending an acoustic signal, listening for it to return. Similar adaptations of similar technologies where you're sending a signal down into the ground and looking for a signal that's related to a resource. So
different resources have different. Is it just because they have different densities or different depth?
Right. You're onto it already. Magnetic susceptibility, conductivity, chargeability. There's all different physical domains that you can image in, and it's understanding which resources respond to which imaging domain, and the geologies are always different. So it's quite complicated, but it helps a lot in prioritizing and de-risking in terms of where you're going to drill. Basically, drilling is very expensive. The more confidence you have on the quality of the target you're drilling, the more de-risking you can apply to it, particularly in oil and gas, where an offshore well can be a $50 million US investment. They're going to spend a lot of money trying to determine that that's the best location to locate a well in. So,
and not to rub it into the Calgary guys, I'm very close to Alberta, but today oil hit a new record, $6 US a barrel. So I was telling our guys today, and for the price of one LGFG shirt, you can now buy 40 barrels of oil. So that's absolutely unbelievable.
That's an interesting metric, an interesting way to look at it.
But that is accurate, right? So mathematically, it makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think the oil's going to keep you that warm, but
well, I mean, depends on how much you burn. No pun intended. All right, I'm just digging it here. I feel bad for Alberta because I spent 5-6 years living there, and obviously that's just terrible for our economy in Canada. But okay, so you get into subsurface imaging. You're finding resources. Obviously, you develop some probably proprietary technologies or some more, let's say, automated, easy-to-use technologies that companies can implement faster that your salespeople.
Well, our proprietary technology is the ability to look deeper, see small things deeper down.
Smaller things deeper down. Is that an alpha ray type of situation? This like radio frequency type stuff?
Some of it is.
Very interesting.
So basically by being able to go deeper around a mine site, for example, you allow them to extend the life of their mine. They're running out of ore, there's stuff deeper down, they don't really know where to find it. If you have an imaging solution that can direct them towards where additional resources are, it can add 5 or 10 years onto their mine life. So,
if I was in your profession and somebody asked me to go deeper, I would just say I'm all out of poetry. Think about it. There it is. That's one of those time bomb jokes. It takes a while to get. So, Keith, let me ask you something. So, obviously, right now the world is going through some insanity with the pandemic. A lot of us are home quarantined. Does this and how does this impact the natural resource exploration industry?
Obviously, it does in a lot of ways. I mean, the initial the initial impact is going to be concern on the health and safety of people's employees. You have typically in a mine site, hundreds, if not thousands of employees, depending on the scale of the mine. Unfortunately, accessing, depending if it's an open pit or underground, you can have concentrations of people in the cages, lifting, shift changes, moving people around. So it's hard to practice, distancing because you can't move people effectively. So you can see a lot of these situations where mines are going to be forced to stand down for a period of time while the infectious rate of the pandemic is at its highest. They will come back from that quite quickly. The rocks are still there. They'll keep things on care and maintenance, pumps running. But it'll be disruptive in terms of their revenue stream. They'll have lost production time. So the CFOs will be, looking at, treasury strength, liquidity, key client relationships, the 80-20 rule, where's their metal being sold to from an offtake point of view? How strong are their clients? Like, how reliable are their payables? So they'll be taking a very standard business risks approach to making sure their receivables are in good shape. And they'll probably be introducing cost controls on the cost side where they can, they'll protect their employees, but they'll probably slow down cash moving out of their businesses.
Speaking of employees in your business and generally in the exploration business, are employees held by the company, or are you hiring employees from a central organization that generally like lends employees to different projects?
It can range, but generally a lot of mines are quite remote and they tend to be hired by the company.
Interesting. Do you think this could potentially change that and give those sort of contract labor firms that are specialized in your field an opportunity for the future to say, hey, this is going to, because who the heck would have imagined that such a global pandemic could happen, but now it's very real? Or is that not really going to impact the future, you think?
Yeah, I don't think that'll change it because I don't know what competitive advantage they would have.
They eat the risk when this happens.
Well, no, the risk is, we lose production.
Fair.
Like, employment's not employment's probably 30% of an operating cost at a mine.
Okay.
Power, logistics, parts, consumables. So labor's a component, but not everything. And
I want to just make a pause on that. It's really important to note. And I think that's something that for me was just a little bit of a truth bomb. Because I approach that question, and this is why it's so good to talk to people in different industries, and you're such a niche, unique industry, is that my business, I approach the question with 70% of cost, and you're coming back and saying, well, actually.
Yeah, for us, it's 30. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
So it's going to be the lost production is going to be the big impact.
How does that impact so nickel is going to be used obviously for, appliances. I kind of read up a little bit on it. Electric batteries, that's a big thing now too.
Yeah. The big driver is stainless steel, and stainless steel is the big driver there is really urbanization rates in China and maybe in the future in India.
Mm-hmm.
One of the new growth applications that you're talking about is high energy density cathodes, for electrification of personal vehicles effectively. So the Teslas and groups like that will be, I think, round numbers. A personal vehicle EV will probably have 250 to 400 kilograms of nickel in it in the future. So yeah, if that industry tracks its growth rate, the future demand for nickel will be sustained for sure.
That's very interesting. I wonder if that inadvertently also will affect the oil prices if there is in fact a production shortage on electric. Not that anything needs to right now affect it, but still.
It's possible. I think, but even sort of aggressive assumptions in EV are still small on a global basis. When you look at 2025 up to 2030, it's I think a 28% compounded growth rate in EV, but it's still sub 10% of global vehicle sales.
I will say that might hold true everywhere except Norway. So our guys listening in Oslo, where the government has been very generous in subsidizing Teslas, where you see them just everywhere, that might be a bigger market share. But yeah, certainly on a global scale right now, it's probably not as significant as it'll be in the next decade or two. So
Yeah, so it's definitely a future piece, and there's going to be a lot of additional disruptive technologies in batteries, both in EV and in storage. This is becoming way too big a opportunity. It's going to attract a lot of investment as it goes forward. So.
How valuable is nickel as a resource in terms of, like you said, the future applications of where the world is going with electric vehicles relative to other natural resources people are mining for? Where does nickel rank in terms of consumption?
Interesting question. All resources are not really rare. It's all price driven. You can get an infinite amount of nickel effectively if you want to pay an infinite amount of money for it. Same with oil. The price is more a reflection of instant sort of market need and demand, and sort of short-term supply and demand, rather than being reflective of fundamental underlying value. There can be differences in extraction costs and production costs. Gold grades are very, very low. Parts per million is kind of ore.
Mm-hmm.
Nickel grades, copper grades are in percentages, so they're much higher grade deposits. Gold is sold by the ounce. Nickel is sold by the pound or the ton. So you get a difference between rare earth, precious metal type stuff, and more bulk metals. So it's really the challenge in nickel is more that it's a complicated milling and metallurgy enrichment process. It's more difficult to extract high quality nickel from ore than, say, other metals may be. So that's why some of the cost of nickel tends to be higher on a per ton basis. And that complexity also over the history of the industry has led to less investment, because it's harder to find, they're harder to process, they tend to be more difficult. Back in the 70s and 80s, there were huge pollution challenges around nickel mines, Sudbury in Canada as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So the nickel industry has had to evolve from a challenging position in terms of requiring higher capital requirements, higher environmental hurdles, and ultimately sort of complicated marketing.
But what's nickel's competitive advantage?
It does now. I mean, I think now if you look at long-term supply and demand, there's not enough supply, there's not enough investment. So part of our thesis is, we're long the nickel business because we think it's underinvested and underdeveloped, particularly when you take in the growth rates around some of these, new applications for the metal effectively.
These new applications for the metal, are they replaceable by other natural resource metals, or is nickel unique due to, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a geologist, I just don't know.
No, it's a great question, and even scientists probably won't really agree on it. I think the lithium ion battery was discovered, I think, in the 60s or 70s by a scientist at ESSO. So it's been under commercial development for 40 years or something. It was lucky enough to sort of win the race for laptop computers, cell phones. So it's experienced a massive amount of commercial growth, and that has been able to drive down the unit cost. So the energy density, the flexibility of the lithium-ion battery is benefited from enormous amounts of commercialization, and that's sort of the platform for electrification of your lawnmower right up to vehicles. It's an interesting situation. There's no doubt there's going to be a lot of other competitive technologies, but when you look at that history of lithium-ion batteries, it's hard to see. It shows you the acceptance curve, the learning curve, and the amount of hurdle rates from a safety point of view, from a price point of view. It's one thing to have a great concept for a new energy storage or battery in a lab, something else to take it through safety, adoption, standardization, and acceptance on a global market. It's years and decades of sustained work to introduce new technology in the space. So lithium ion has a huge amount of momentum with it.
Is nickel a significant contributor to that battery?
Yeah, sorry. Lithium-ion battery. Lithium is lithium-ion is a catchphrase that the cathode is predominantly nickel generally.
Mm-hmm. And why is it nickel? Is it because of its conductive powers, because of the cost to conduction ratio, or something
Energy
else?
storage. It
Okay.
can take a high density of electrons. Like when you're trying to
Mm.
make a battery, you want to
Yep.
be able to push a lot of energy into it,
Right.
really, and then have that energy come back as you need. Nickel is at the moment one of the best storage medias for electrons.
Is that what supercapacitors are using now? That's a big thing right now, like new age sort of storage
Yep.
batteries. Yeah.
Yeah. Different technology, but similar goals in the end, I think. Yeah.
That's interesting because, like I'm sort of like a layman. I don't want to. I'm not even a consumer in this sense. Really, just a civilian. And I hear a lot of talk about trading gold and trading silver, and people think about that as God's money, not so much about its literal scientific and practical applications. And you are in a mineral that's not, traditionally considered to be a precious metal, but really in today's world, it might be the precious metal because it has such profound and vast,
Right.
applications.
Yeah. If it's all driven by um, climate change awareness,
Mm,
reducing carbon footprint. I think a lot of the big governments in the world are aligned with replacing combustion engines with electric motors.
mm-hmm,
I think local governments are aligned with that because of reduced air pollution,
mm.
uh, particulates in the air. And I think the big automobile manufacturers are supportive of it because I think they see it as a more profitable business ultimately, potentially, because it's a lot easier to make an electric vehicle than it is to make a combustion engine. They've got pretty good, since Henry Ford, at sort
Mm.
of optimization, quality of manufacturing of combustion engines, but it takes high skill sets, a lot of moving parts, a lot of service. You can make a electric motor that will outperform a combustion engine with like a smaller factory, fewer employees, fewer moving parts, simpler supply chains. So from a business model going forward, when I see big governments, local governments, and major manufacturing companies aligning themselves effectively in the same technical direction, that's where I think this push at electrification will have a substantial momentum to it again. Nothing's
And
guaranteed,
yeah,
but
it's what I'm finding really interesting about this, just kind of going into this topic. It's like I kind of like cars. Like I think cars are pretty cool. I think a lot of dudes listening to this also think some cars are kind of cool. And when I think about the history of auto manufacturing, from Ferruccio Lamborghini to Ferdinand Porsche to Henry Ford, and all these folks that contributed substantially, these were mechanical engineers. Some of them educated, some of them more home educated,
yep.
let's say. And all of these, all my friends that went to mechanical engineering in school, where I went up to UBC in Vancouver, they were always, it was always about mechanical systems. And what's interesting is the car engineer of the future is an electrical engineer, which is a very
Parts of it,
different,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
really, when you're talking about electric systems versus
Yeah,
combustion engine,
absolutely. Yeah,
different
I mean,
technology. Yeah,
suspension, steering,
sure.
aerodynamics, still other components, but and safety.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. The power plant is going to be electric.
Well,
I,
and then yeah,
you know,
but I'm
yeah,
looking at people that are, when you walk into a car manufacturer in 20 years, you're going to be looking at a very, very different group of people that are significantly contributing to what then will be the biggest value added in the vehicle. Because look, I mean, of course we're going to, I follow a little bit of Formula One. There's going to be some incremental improvements in suspension. There's going to be some
yeah,
incremental improvements in safety of the vehicle. But the real exponential leaps are going to happen in the heart of the vehicle. It's going to happen in the power source. And this is where car companies of the future are probably already starting to recruit today, as they're looking for the best electrical engineers, whereas in the past it was
yep,
about getting the best mechanical.
yeah, absolutely. You're just describing Tesla today. Like
Yeah.
when you meet, the head of their cathode engineering or their procurement or the people who are working on this, they're talented engineers, Stanford, Harvard, MIT, whatever. Very, very bright kids doing good work. Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of credibility to the evolution of the technology. I think they're learning a lot very quickly from sustainability and performance point of view, and now that has to get translated into manufacturing processes. But I think they're coming up that learning curve. You know, I wouldn't have been an early adapter buying an early electric car, but you know, I can see myself in an electric vehicle within the next 5 years, and I've been a combustion engine guy my entire life. So,
do you guys do any business with Tesla? I'm sure people want to know. Or indirectly, I guess, in your case.
Yeah. The straight answer to that is no. We have a good relationship with Tesla, but no, we don't do any direct business with them right now.
Fair enough. Has the band, being in the nickel industry, has the band Nickelback substantially hurt your reputation?
Sorry, no.
I'm sorry to all my Canadian listeners. I'm sorry. Canada.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was terrible.
That's all right.
But I like that I had you going for about 2 seconds there, so that's good. So I guess to kind of wrap it up, being in the exploration space, being in that sort of a very, look, it's a very niche business and industry, and actually, you know, coming from Vancouver myself and being very frequently around different startup mining companies, it's a very startup-y environment. You know, like there's just a lot of things are just very not concrete, not guaranteed. It's a very startup environment.
Yeah, it is. You know, the definition of high risk, high return. Absolutely. Yeah.
Who are the winners in that kind of a space? What kind of characteristics, what kind of outlook, what kind of skill set does an executive in that space bring to win?
I mean, it's probably, you know, you get different answers from different people, but I think from me, you have to clearly quantify risk, and you need to communicate to your stakeholders the risks in a project, and make sure that the risks that the project is actually taking are consistent with risks that they're prepared to take. So when an investor invests in a project with us, our obligation is to make sure that we mitigate and manage away any other risk from that, so that, you know, his return is not diluted by funds going to anything else. It's really an effectiveness of management to make sure that you operate the project as effectively as possible to answer the question consistent with the risk that the investor took. So it's a bit of a complicated answer, but it's really one of accountability, transparency, risk mitigation, being very clear with the objectives, what can go wrong. And when an investor who likes risk can clearly understand what risks you're indicating he's going to take, and then you hold yourself accountable to that. You know, the use of proceeds of your financing, your accounting, your project execution, your reporting has to go right back to answering that question. You know, this is what we took your money for. This is what we did with it. This is the result. And it's either been successful or not. That's the risk you took. So.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that a new entrant to the space would have a hard time raising capital, because you probably need a win or two behind you in order to show credibility in such a high risk space.
It's hard to raise capital at any level, but
fair.
I mean, we have the advantage, I guess, in some ways of, you know, 40 years of professional legacy in this industry, and have been involved with a lot of major discoveries around the world. So, we're pretty good at what we do.
So what's your shortcut? I'm kidding. Don't answer that. That's a terrible question. I always, you know, and it's funny, I always crack guys up whenever I would go in people's offices, which I got to do for years, which I loved, whether it was the CEO of a manufacturing firm or an exploration company or a partner at a law firm. My first question, like, so what's your shortcut to get here? And they always just crack up and laugh. And I hope that we have some younger people that tune into these because it's such a, you know, that sort of a response when you just crack up laughing right away, I think answers that question. I think people need to hear.
Yeah, well, no, I think, you know, it's I recommend it for people. It's been a phenomenal experience for me. I've been able to live, you know, the professional life I envisioned for myself. Worked with a lot of great people around the world. Done a lot of good things that I think have had, you know, good economic impact on different countries, you know, changing the standards of living in these places, and successful for investors. So, but, you know, it's not for everyone. Like, living with this level of risk constantly, a lot of people would find too stressful, I would think.
That's another thing.
To me, it's exciting. That's what we want.
I bet there was a couple of days in your life that it didn't feel so exciting.
Yeah, but you forget those ones, right?
I'm too young to know, man. I still wake up remembering, but I hope to last. And I guess like most things, most success is really about just longevity. And yeah.
Well, it's just, success is can be defined many different ways. If you're pursuing a path that you're passionate about with good people and you kind of get to do it every day, then that's a certain level of success on its own. It's like life's not an end point. It's a journey. It's how you get there and who you do it with. And if you're in a position where you can make decisions proactively to determine where you're going and who you're doing it with, then for a lot of people, that's an incredible level of success right there.
Well, and I think your success in your field and your industry is a token to what you talked about, being able to deal with a high level of risk at any given point in time is substantially explained by the phrase delayed gratification. And the ability to live to, let's put it this way, to go for what you want deepest versus what you want most.
Right.
That trade-off is a very, very difficult philosophical trade-off, and it happens across all industries that I've noticed. So I appreciate you commenting on that, because I know that at least the folks at our firm at LGFG Fashion House will know that line, because we've used that line. We talk about that line. So Keith, I appreciate your time. I'm going to tag this on LinkedIn and put you out there.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And I really, really hope.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course, and I hope that some of our guys in Perth and Vancouver and anywhere else that natural, mineral exploration takes place and resource exploration takes place find value in this. And cheers.
Yeah. No, thank you very much.